On April 6, 2017, 22-year-old Jacob Gray went missing while traveling on Salduc Hot Springs Road in the Olympic National Park of Washington. His whereabouts remained unknown until August 10, 2018, when his body was discovered in Ho Lake, located within the Daniel J. Evans Wilderness area of the park. This was 15 miles away from his belongings and at an elevation of 5,300 feet. This is the story of Jacob Gray. Jacob Gray, a native of Santa Cruz, California, embarked on a solo bicycle trip from Port Townsend, Washington on April 5, 2017, hauling a fully loaded trailer of camping equipment. His ultimate destination was the Daniel J. Evans Wilderness in Olympic National Park, Washington, before continuing eastward. However, on April 6, Gray's bicycle, trailer, and most of his belongings were found approximately 6.5 miles up Salduc Hot Springs Road, a picturesque route named after the Quileute Indian term for sparkling waters. An unusual discovery was made. A bow was lying on the ground, and arrows were embedded in the ground and protruding from the back of the trailer, but there was no sign of the owner of the bike and gear. Jacob Gray's bicycle had a unique backstory. It was a promotional bike won by his father, Randy, at a contractor's show. As the son of a house builder, Gray was skilled with a skill saw, and he constructed a plywood rack behind the seat, which he secured 2 milk crates to, side by side. The bike's flat rat trap pedals were suitable for his running shoes or hiking boots, and while it wasn't built for speed or aesthetics, it was practical and efficient, much like a pickup truck. When it came to camping gear, Gray had a preferred shopping destination, the Goodwill store in Port Townsend, Washington. There, he gathered items for his journey, including wool blankets, pots and pans, a toolbox, a stove, a deck of cards, a Holman Bible, a tent, fuel bottles, a case of Mountain House dehydrated meals, 2 first aid kits, carabiners, climbing crampons, a bow and quiver of arrows, a rain poncho, a sleeping bag, tarps, rope, and bungee cords.
Whenever you're in a wilderness situation, particularly one that's high altitude and remote, there's several things you have to contend with if you're trying to survive. You've got the temperature, you have potential wildlife and terrain-related injuries, you have the need for water, the need for food, and any of these things can become a major problem and potentially kill you if you're not ready for them and if you don't know how to deal with them.
Despite the harsh weather conditions that characterized northwestern Washington in the early days of April, Jacob, a skilled surfer who had grown up on the beach, remained undeterred. He had a deep connection with the water, which energized him in all its forms, whether he was surfing on it or simply riding in it. According to his father, Randy, Jacob's love for the water had been cultivated from a young age, and it was evident in the way he fearlessly rode the waves, regardless of the weather conditions. Despite the challenges posed by the harsh weather, Jacob's enthusiasm for his trip remained unwavering. Jacob's father said,
"Even if we don't go surfing, we'll get a coffee and go down to the beach and watch the sunrise. That sort of thing."
There were a few reported sightings of Jacob, but they were not very helpful in locating him. However, some of the sightings seemed credible. For instance, a man claimed to have seen Jacob twice in Indian Valley and along Crescent Lake on April 5. The next day, a woman reported seeing a man towing a red trailer climbing Fairholme Hill at 1 o'clock in the morning. Later that same morning, another woman passed Jacob as he was riding up the Salduc Hot Springs Road, which was about 2 miles from the 101. Later that afternoon, the same woman noticed Jacob's rig on the side of the road, which was 6.5 miles upriver from the 101. She was curious enough to snap a quick photo of the abandoned contraption, which was a flash of red and yellow against the green of the forest. However, it wasn't a good place to camp or stash a bike for long, as it was highly visible, not 10 yards from the road, and only 20 yards from the river. Despite these sightings, Jacob's whereabouts remained unknown. A ranger had recalled seeing the bike and gear, but didn't think much of it, assuming that the rider was on a short excursion on foot. This wasn't uncommon in the area since touring cyclists were a common sight, and Jacob was the first of many to come. However, it was evident that someone, possibly Jacob, had been organizing gear as there was a poly tarp spread out, surrounded by camping equipment. However, what caught the ranger's attention were the 4 arrows stuck in the ground in an east-west line near the tarp. While going missing isn't a crime or an emergency for individuals over 18, a person isn't considered missing until someone reports them as such. In this case, nobody had reported Jacob missing at all. It was rare for a cyclist to vanish, unlike hikers and runners. However, the fact that the bike remained untouched for most of the day piqued the Rangers' curiosity. On the afternoon of April 6, Ranger John Bowie searched the area around the bike, hoping to find any clues. He wondered if the cyclist had gone to the river to filter some water or hitchhike to the hot springs. But if he had slipped and fallen into the sub-40-degree water, he would have sure succumbed. The following is the actual missing persons dispatch call to park rangers.
741 Ron on North Point.
741 Ron.
I've got a bicycle that has went off the Salt Duck Road about mile marker 7, and I can't find anybody around it. You might want to send a ranger up here so we can see what's going on.
Copy, thanks for the info. 1630.
741 Ron, 611. 741 Ron, this is Echo 8 on North Point. I'll head that way. Is that bicycle down the bank a ways, or is it easy to get to? It's easy to get to. It's got a little carrier on the back of it, too. It looked like it crashed off the road. Okay, so it didn't look like maybe somebody hit it there so they can go off for a hike. It doesn't look like anybody's hit it. It looks like he just went off the road. I'm going to stay here until you get up this way. Okay, I'll be coming over from the yellow. 741 Ron.
When Ranger Bowie stumbled upon the bike and trailer, his heart sank as he feared the worst. However, to his relief, they were in excellent condition, fully operational with no signs of damage or malfunction. The trailer was loaded with a ton of equipment, which indicated that the owner had come fully prepared for his adventure. Despite the reassuring state of the bike and trailer, the Rangers couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. Their worst fears were confirmed when they scoured the Salt Duck Hot Springs resort, and no one had seen the owner. They suspected that he may have fallen into the river, but they had to keep searching to be sure. On that fateful Friday, Ranger Ray stumbled upon Jacob's wallet, ID, and a list of phone numbers. It confirmed the owner's identity but also heightened their concerns for his safety. Ray immediately contacted Jacob's sister, Mallory, and upon hearing the news she implored Ray to call their parents in Santa Cruz right away, hoping they could help in the search and bring Jacob home safely.
The case of Jacob Gray is interesting because we have someone who is very young, in his early 20s, and who had, by all accounts, a lot of experience with dealing with camping, even camping solo, and had a lot of equipment. He had a whole bicycle cart full of the type of gear that you would need to survive in just that type of environment. And that leads to the question, why didn't he survive? When he was discovered something around 15 miles from his main campsite where he had left most of his gear, he still had some of his gear on him. 15 miles is a long way, but it's not an unreasonable amount of distance for someone to cover in their early 20s who's experienced outdoorsman, but it does make you wonder why he was so far away from the area that he had stashed most of his gear.
After finding Jacob's abandoned bike and trailer, the Rangers scoured the surrounding area for any signs of evidence. They kicked through the dense ferns and combed the river banks, searching for anything that might indicate what had happened to the missing cyclist. Despite their efforts, the Rangers had very little to go on, other than the functioning bike and trailer. The equipment appeared to be in excellent condition, with no signs of damage or malfeasance. The tires were inflated, and there was no indication that Jacob had been hit by a vehicle. However, all signs seemed to point to the river as the likely location of Jacob's disappearance. The Olympic National Park Rangers concluded that he may have slipped and fallen into the water while trying to filter it into his camel bach. They planned to search the river more thoroughly when the water levels went down in the summer. Jacob's mother, Laura, had spoken to him just a few nights before he set out on his journey. She knew that he was excited to embark on a cross-country tour to visit his brother in Vermont. Jacob had even mentioned that he might take 2 years to complete the trip, working odd jobs and seasonal work along the way. When Jacob's mother, Laura, reached out to the Rangers for help, they explained that their park was extremely understaffed and overburdened. The park covered an area that was 200,000 acres larger than Yosemite and received almost 4 million visitors each year. Unfortunately, Due to budget cuts in 2013, nearly two-thirds of their law enforcement personnel had been transferred to other parks and not replaced. To compound their already overloaded situation, within a week of Jacob's bike being found, there were two other incidents in the park, a plane crash and another missing person. The Rangers were stretched thin and simply didn't have the resources or personnel to conduct a full-scale search for Jacob. It was a heartbreaking situation for Laura and Jacob's loved ones, who were left feeling helpless and frustrated by the lack of support from the park authorities. Randy, Jacob's father, dropped his hammer gun and threw his wetsuit into his truck. Rangers told him the bike was found near the river and Randy had a sense he'd be searching swift water. He picked up Mallory and sped north, driving the 1,000 miles from Santa Cruz straight through.
I drove all night. I got stopped going 100 miles an hour in Oregon. I told him what was going on. He said, "I'm not the last cop to not give you a ticket. Just be careful."
When Randy and Mallory arrived at the park, 5 days had already passed since the Rangers first discovered Jacob's abandoned bike. Other family members and friends, including Jacob's mother Laura, flew into SeaTac and drove to the park for what ended up being a tragic search and rescue mission. The family was surprised to learn that no ranger-assisted search had been launched yet. Unfortunately, national parks operate like sovereign countries, and search and rescue personnel from outside the park must be requested by park officials in order to initiate a search. Jacob's bike was discovered just 40 feet away from the river, which was 40 feet wide at the high water mark. On the other side of the river is the Olympic National Forest, which is under a different jurisdiction. Unlike national parks, national forests operate under the county model, and the Clallam County Sheriff's Department is responsible for search and rescue there, which is only a stone's throw away from the park. Randy and Danny suited up and entered the river, but they sensed lethargy from park officials and decided to take matters into their own hands. The family demanded an intense search, and Ranger Ray agreed to their request. Randy searched behind waterfalls, in deep holes, and under log jams while Mallory kicked through ferns, looking for any evidence. The family was surprised to find that the park had not requested any outside assistance, such as dog teams or aircraft from Whidbey Island Naval Air Station. Randy bushwhacked through thick brush and thorny Devil's Club in the rain, suffering from trench foot due to wet socks. Despite his physical discomfort, he remained determined to find his son alive. Surprisingly, the Coast Guard, based in Port Angeles, was not requested for assistance, nor were the aircraft from Whidbey Island Naval Air Station, which have been known to assist with some Olympic National Park searches. Time is of the essence in search and rescue operations, and the delay of 5 days and the lack of assistance from neighboring agencies greatly reduced the chances of finding Jacob alive. It was a devastating realization for the family, who were left feeling let down by the system and desperate for answers. Randy and Mallory arrived at the Olympic National Park on Tuesday, April 11th, 5 days after the Rangers discovered Jacob's bike. Laura, Jacob's mother, and Danny Campbell, Jacob's cousin, met them at the park. Despite the family's eagerness to initiate a search with dog teams, the park declined their offer and instead opted to keep the search in-house. After the discovery of a bike on April 6, 2017, the Clallam County Sheriff's Office conducted a search the following day with the help of approximately 30 people and dogs, but their efforts were fruitless. Olympic Mountain Rescue was called in nearly a week later on April 12 and during their search, they found evidence suggesting that someone had exchanged hiking boots for running shoes, walked towards the river, and slipped and fallen into it, leaving a mark on a mossy rock. Further downstream, there were signs that the individual may have attempted to climb out. However, a state fisheries biologist was assigned to look through the log jams in the river instead of swift water rescue divers. On April 13, the search for the individual became a search for a body instead of a live cyclist, and dog teams were brought in. 2 cadaver dogs indicated a log jam where a corpse might be trapped, but after searching all log jams for 12 miles on either side of the bike area, no body was found. The search operation continued in Olympic National Park throughout the week, but on April 14, the park transitioned into a limited continuous search, effectively ending the search by Olympic Rangers.
Did he become lost? Just got confused? Maybe despite being an avid outdoorsman, didn't have a lot of experience doing navigation, particularly in maybe inclement conditions or bad weather that are really common in the Pacific Northwest? Was he out there on purpose to commit suicide and no one knows about it? The fact that his body wasn't discovered until like a year later made it really hard, basically impossible, to determine exactly what happened and what was the cause of death.
After a period of over a year, specifically on the late afternoon of Friday, August 10, 2018, a group of biologists embarked on a trip into the mountains to study marmots. During their expedition, they stumbled upon the remains, clothing, and gear. The discovery was made at the top of a ridge located above Ho Lake, approximately 5,300 feet above sea level, and at a distance of at least 15 miles from where he abandoned his bicycle. The location where Jacob's remains were discovered was not near any trail, and during the time of his disappearance, which was in April, the terrain would have been covered in snow and potentially prone to avalanches. The remains were found on a treeless ridge, which could have been visible from the air.
Was it foul play? Or was there something even weirder that happened out there in the middle of the woods? It's always possible there was something natural, either a wild animal, or maybe he ate something that was poisonous, similar to what happened to Chris McCandless. So some of the questions are, if he did want to die, why isn't it more obvious what happened? And if he didn't, he seemingly had all the resources at his disposal to at least put up a good fight. He had a lighter on his body. It doesn't appear that he had made any fire or anything near to where his body was found. So there's lots of weird things that could have happened. Maybe there's another person that he met out there, someone who he knew before, maybe a stranger. Maybe it was someone who convinced him to go off the path that he was comfortable with, either accidentally or on purpose. Maybe they became separated, or maybe this person took him out into the woods on purpose and it was some kind of murder. While we'll almost certainly never know exactly what happened, we do know that a lot of things can go wrong when you're out in the woods, especially alone. So it's always good to make sure you're mentally, physically, and gear-wise prepared to be in a potential wilderness survival situation. And that's especially true if you're in a more remote, high-altitude location, like in this case. And it's usually a good idea to have a general plan ahead of time about where you're going to be and let someone else know about it. That way, if you don't get back in time, they have a specific place to look.
The story of Jacob Gray can serve as a cautionary tale for other hikers and can help them be more aware and prepared for the potential dangers of hiking in the wilderness. It highlights the importance of being prepared. Jacob Gray was an experienced hiker, but even he faced unexpected circumstances that led to his disappearance. This serves as a reminder that no matter how experienced a hiker is, it's essential to be well prepared for any situation. It emphasizes the importance of safety precautions. Gray's backpack was found on a trail near the summit of Mount Eleanor, indicating that he may have strayed from the marked trail. This underscores the importance of sticking to marked trails and avoiding shortcuts or unmarked paths. It encourages hikers to be more cautious. Hiking in the wilderness can be a wonderful experience, but it's important to remember that it can also be dangerous. The story of Jacob Gray can encourage hikers to be more cautious and aware of their surroundings while on the trail. It reinforces the need for communication. Gray's family reported him missing when he did not return from his hike. This highlights the importance of letting someone know your plans before heading out on a hike and staying in communication with others while on the trail. In summary, the story of Jacob Gray can help other hikers by reminding them of the importance of being prepared, taking safety precautions, being cautious, and communicating their plans with others. By taking these steps, hikers can minimize the risks and enjoy a safer and more enjoyable hiking experience in the wilderness.
The first snowfall of the year is usually a beautiful and joyous celebration in the small ski town of Mammoth Lakes in California's eastern Sierra, but the early October snow in 2013 was disheartening for the searchers of a missing Pennsylvania man. Hope was fading with the inevitable change in season, and those close to Matthew Greene were starting to understand the grave reality that he may never be found. From more than 2,500 miles away, his loved ones experienced a tug-of-war between despair and optimism, feeling helpless across the country as they went through the motions of their daily lives. 3 months earlier in July, the 39-year-old high school math teacher dropped his car off at a Mammoth auto shop for repairs. He was visiting the area for a summer climbing vacation when the car blew a head gasket. The friends Greene was traveling with headed home as scheduled, and Greene planned to drive to Colorado to join other friends for more climbing as soon as his car was ready. "I may have to spend the rest of my life here in Mammoth," he texted to a friend as he got more and more frustrated with how long the repair was taking. He was anxious to get on with his trip. No one has heard from Greene since he last talked to his parents on July 16, 2013. He did not tell anyone his plans for the following day. He never picked up his car. His campsite was left tidy, and his credit cards and phone have not been used. Matthew had a habit of ripping out pages from a guidebook as to where he planned to hike, instead of taking the entire book with him. When he would return from the hike, he would replace the missing pages as a trophy of sorts. The only clue that was found was a few pages torn from a mountaineering guidebook, and this pointed toward the Minarets and Ritter Range, a rugged mountain massif in the Ansel Adams Wilderness. At the time, Mammoth Lakes was experiencing sunshine and above-average temperatures. On July 29, 2013, Matthew Greene was reported missing, and his body has not been found in the 3 years since. In 2013, more than 600,000 Americans were reported missing, according to the FBI's National Crime Information Center. At the end of the year, nearly 85,000 of those cases were still active. At the time he went missing, Matthew Greene was the only unsolved missing person case in Mammoth Lakes, and in January 2014, Greene's family filed for a death certificate in Pennsylvania, but the case is still open with the Mammoth Lakes Police Department. Most people assume that Matt was a victim of some sort of climbing accident, a fall of some sort. Says John Greco, Greene's good friend and climbing partner that met him in California. But all his friends agree that he was experienced, skilled, and careful in the mountains. Born September 8, 1973, to Robert and Patricia Greene, Matthew is the second of 4 children. He grew up in rural Pennsylvania, developing a love for the outdoors from a young age. He was a Boy Scout and often went hunting and fishing with his dad. Growing up in the boondocks of Franklin Township was a blessing. Greene wrote in 1999 in a letter to his sister, Tiffany Minto, when he was in the Peace Corps. "I came out of there with independence, a love of nature, and the determination needed to succeed in track, school, or whatever." When they were kids, Greene would take Minto fishing and target shooting at the lake, where they'd stay until bugs feasted on their arms. They went hiking together often, even in the really cold winters common to the Northeast. "The ice didn't slow him down one bit, I struggled to keep up," Minto said. Greene loved to run, competing on the track team in high school and running the Boston Marathon a few times as an adult. As the student speaker for his high school graduation, Greene urged his classmates to take chances. "The time has come to fulfill our current goals and to set new ones to be conquered later. In our future travels and endeavors, no matter where they take us, we must not lose our youthful imaginations. We must not be too scared to take risks, and most of all, we must live life to the fullest," Matthew said in his high school graduation speech. Greene went on to study at Clemson University in South Carolina before transferring to and graduating from Pennsylvania State University. As a Peace Corps volunteer on a teaching assignment in Papua New Guinea from 1998 to 2001, he regularly wrote letters to his sister, giving her advice on life, college, and relationships. Any associations you have in your life can be lumped into one of these 3 categories: people who push you forward, people who drag you down, and people who do neither, he wrote. He also wrote to friends, telling tales of his adventures, like walking 6 hours to fix a radio transceiver and an anti-city hiking tour, which was a 9-hour trek across dense bush and mountainous terrain where he found himself crossing a roaring 100-foot waterfall, wading through shallow rivers, carefully walking on top of scores of muddy, mossy logs, ascending countless ridges, and descending countless valleys. In his letters, Greene not only gave accounts of his work and explorations, but he also contemplated life and its greater meaning. He wrote, It's a pitiful thing when people reach the point in their lives where passionate inclinations no longer win out over regular routine. I don't know why our minds always gravitate to reason. It's a nuisance. At least for me, it takes a lot of mental effort to give in to my passions, though once I've devoted myself to them I'm never plagued with regret. When he returned from the Peace Corps, Greene got a job as a high school math teacher in Pennsylvania and would go on summer climbing trips to fulfill his need for adventure. He often traveled out west solo for camping, hiking, and climbing, occasionally meeting up with friends along the way. In 2006 he road-tripped through South Dakota, Wyoming, and on to Red Lodge, Montana. When his car broke down at the end of the trip, he tooled around town and hitchhiked to a trailhead. In his trip log he wrote over the course of a few days.
I put in an awesome 10-hour hike. The rock was surprisingly solid. Yet, some big pieces moved. Returned to find that rodents had torn into my engine plug wires, vacuum hoses, mostly wire sheathing. Coasted into town, took my car to Ronings. They should get to it tomorrow morning.
The next day he wrote,
Same as yesterday, no car yet. Hitched a ride out to the Bear Track and hiked up the Silver Plateau. It's awesome up there, good mix of pines and open fields. More reading. More net searching. Coming up with a plan. Yellowstone, climb Tiwanaut, Wind River Range, Ring the Bells, Arrow, Vestal, possibly Eolus, Sunshine and Wisdom, Great Sand Dunes, Jessica and Long's Peak, then home. Still waiting on that car.
Greene arrived in Mammoth Lakes a few days before he met up with his friends John and Jill Greco on June 28, 2013. He set up camp at New Shady Rest Campground on the edge of town and paid through July 7. John, Jill, and their 9-year-old son checked in at a hotel nearby. Over the next 10 days, Greene and John climbed many of the region's classic routes at places like Crystal Crag, Clark's Canyon, the Benton Crags, and the Gong Show Crag. They also ticked a few of the Eastern Sierra's classic alpine routes, including the North Couloir on North Peak near Yosemite National Park and V-Notch on Polymonium Peak near Big Pine. On previous trips Greene kept a handwritten log of his climbs, sometimes elaborate and other times brief. He often checked and reported conditions on climbing websites. During this trip, he wrote on Summit Post.
Did the V-Notch on Saturday, July 6th. We easily crossed the Schrund via a snow bridge at the far left side. We studied the route well for signs of rockfall before committing, and only had one baseball-size rock rocket down during our ascent. Tons of rocks were falling down the U-Notch, though.
During Greene's time in Mammoth, his Subaru was in and out of the auto repair shop. It would get fixed, then overheat driving up a steep grade and go back to the mechanic. It was finally diagnosed with a blown head gasket, which would take additional time to repair. On July 7 John and Jill were scheduled to leave Mammoth Lakes. John had a work meeting in Southern California the next day, and Matt planned to leave for Colorado to meet up with other friends. That morning the whole group hiked to Emerald Lake in the Mammoth Lakes Basin, where they skipped rocks and enjoyed the morning at the lake before Matt continued up the trail to the Mammoth Crest, and John and Jill headed down to their car to begin the drive south. It was the last time any of Matt's friends would ever see him.
As we were walking down the trail, I say to my husband, you know, he goes off like this, and he doesn't tell anybody. If something happens to him, we are not going to know where to look, Jill said. My husband says, yeah, and the bad thing about it is his car won't be at the trailhead.
Even though Greene had planned to leave that day as well, his car was still in the shop.
He was fine with being stuck in Mammoth. It's not like he was in some remote backcountry area. There were shuttles to take you all over the place, and he thought it was only going to be a couple days.
Over the next 8 days, Greene continued to climb classic Sierra peaks and routes, checking in with John and Jill via text every few days. On July 8, Greene soloed Regelhuth Minaret, a 10,560-foot spire in the Ritter Range west of Mammoth Lakes. On July 9, Greene headed north to climb Dana Couloir, a popular 1,200-foot ice route on a 13,000-foot peak near Yosemite National Park's eastern entrance. Later he sent John an update.
The Regelhuth Minaret took less than 6.5 hours round trip but was scary, and the Dana Couloir was easy but fun and had the best ice of the trip.
July 10 was a rest day. Greene called his parents and did some grocery shopping. On July 11, Greene took the shuttle to Red's Meadow Valley to hike and climb in the Minarets and Ritter Range again. On the ride to the trailhead, he spoke with a Devil's Postpile maintenance worker. They talked about climbing Mount Ritter, Banner Peak, Clyde Minaret, and the cross-country hike between Ediza, Iceberg, Cecile, and Minaret Lakes. He was not sure of his itinerary for the day when he got off the shuttle at the Devil's Postpile trailhead, but he eventually climbed the 12,280-foot Clyde Minaret, the tallest of the Minaret's jagged peaks. From July 12 to the 15th, Greene hiked a cross-country route on Mammoth Crest, and he climbed Unicorn Peak in Yosemite's high country. On July 16 he went to the Mammoth Lakes Library to use the internet. He called his parents and the mechanic, then sent a few text messages and made a small purchase at Rite Aid. He paid the campground for the night and the next day. Since Jill and John left Mammoth, they continued texting back and forth with Greene every few days. Jill updated him on details for a trip to France they were tentatively planning for later that summer, and John received updates on the climbs Greene had done. Jill grew concerned when Greene stopped responding to texts.
At first I didn't think anything about it, she said. I texted him and didn't hear back. Then I phoned him and my husband sent him a text. Again, we didn't hear from him.
On July 21, after 3 unpaid nights, the host at the campground reported the abandoned campsite and suspicion of a missing or overdue person to the Mammoth Lakes Police Department. 2 MLPD officers responded to the call, visited the campground, and recorded the information on a police log. Campsite number 164 was left intact, but Greene had not returned to it. His neatly folded laundry was stored inside the tent along with some gear. His food was in the bear box. MLPD Detective Doug Hornbeck said,
"We can't really do a whole lot unless a missing person report is filed. We'll get a name and the information, put it on the log, and that's as far as it goes."
So the campsite was broken down, Greene's gear was put into storage, and new campers soon occupied the site. On July 26, Greene's mom expressed concern to her daughter that she hadn't heard from Matt. She'd been leaving messages that went unanswered. But Greene often went on long hikes and backpacking trips and didn't return messages immediately. Sometimes it would take him days or weeks to readjust to society after a good trek. He enjoyed the solitude of the wilderness and was not into technology, so Minto brushed off her mom's concerns, saying,
"He probably couldn't charge his phone or was spending some time in the backcountry."
Bill knew that Greene could not use his car phone charger because his Subaru was still in the shop, so she thought maybe his phone was dead. Still, she knew that his lack of response was unusual and she grew increasingly concerned when she didn't hear from him for 10 days. John called Tony, Greene's friend that he was planning to meet in Colorado, to see if Greene had arrived. Maybe he was spending time in the backcountry, Tony suggested. On July 29, 7 days after Greene's campsite was packed up and put into storage, Jill called the Norco Goodyear to inquire about the car. She was told it had been ready since July 18. Greene had not responded to a message saying the car was ready and he had not picked it up. Jill then called the Mammoth Lakes Welcome Center and talked to a ranger. She asked for someone to check on his campsite, and the ranger insisted she file a missing person report. 13 days after Greene disappeared, he was officially reported missing. Greene was no stranger to climbing mountains. His list of ascents logged on summitpost.org reads like the resume of an experienced mountaineer, and his climbing partners say he was skillful on ice, calculated in the outdoors, and did not take risks. More than 2 weeks after Greene talked to his parents for the last time, Detective Hornbeck contacted Verizon for an emergency information request. Verizon concluded that Greene's phone had been powered off for quite some time and there was no way to track the current location. The last ping was registered to the cellular tower on Mammoth Mountain on July 16. According to Detective Hornbeck, the ping created a cone-shaped triangle with towers in Fresno and June Lake, indicating that Greene's phone was located within that region, which consists mostly of the Ansel Adams Wilderness. The Mammoth Lakes Police Department did not find any evidence of foul play, and the possibility of suicide was quickly ruled out. Greene did not have any financial troubles. He was single and showed no signs of depression. When the Grecos last saw him in Mammoth, Jill said he was his normal optimistic self. On July 31, Detective Hornbeck notified Bill Greene, no relation, at Mono County Sheriff's Search and Rescue. Typically when a person is reported overdue in the mountains, SAR launches an investigation. They are quick to respond and have a healthy roster of volunteers that are experienced mountaineers, but Matthew Greene did not tell anyone where he was going. And his car was still at the mechanic, so they didn't even have a trailhead. Without a known location, SAR could not begin a search. Matthew Greene could have gone anywhere. Most of his equipment was stored in his car, which was parked outside the Norco Goodyear while waiting for repair, meaning he had access to his personal belongings 24 hours a day. From an inventory of the equipment left in his car and tent, friends were able to deduce what he was carrying with him. He was probably wearing a blue outdoor research ball cap, a black t-shirt over a long-sleeve green shirt, and mountaineering approach shoes. He had a large black and white mountain hardware backpack, a Petzl cork ice axe, black diamond crampons, and was either carrying or wearing yellow La Sportiva mountaineering boots. He did not have overnight gear. Since he had no vehicle, Greene's only option to get to trailheads was walking, hitchhiking, or public transportation. With a number of local shuttle services, which Greene had used in the week prior to his disappearance, he could have made it to a number of trailheads, from the Mammoth Lakes Basin to Yosemite Valley. When Greene went for a hike or climb, he often removed the pages of a guidebook and reinserted them with notes after the climb. From High Sierra, peaks, passes, and trails found in his camp belongings, Chapter 12 was torn out, the minarets and June Lake. With the shuttle to Red's Meadow, Greene could have been at any one of the 3 main trailheads in the valley that leads to a network of paths that access the minarets and Ritter Range in the Ansel Adams Wilderness. The 231,533-acre wilderness area is located west of Mammoth Lakes and the Sierra Nevada crest in Madera County. It shares a border with Yosemite National Park to the north, and the 581,000-acre John Muir Wilderness to the south. Though the region is popular for hiking, backpacking, and climbing, the mountain range is vast and rugged. Even though SAR could not launch a formal search without a known destination, they sent teams to the Minaret region on training missions. They checked summit registers in the range, and a helicopter team did a flyover. Detective Hornbeck worked with the U.S. Forest Service to contact people with overnight wilderness permits for the region. If anyone spoke with Greene on the trail or shuttle, or gave him a ride, they have not come forward or they do not know that he is missing. Greene's family hired an aerial tour company to fly over the region. They mounted a red digital camera to the wing of an old Piper airplane. The camera is capable of recording high-quality images at 30 frames per second while being zoomed in 3x. They recorded 100 gigabytes of data that was later processed and examined, but showed no evidence of Greene. Detective Hornbeck followed up on every single tip. Psychics from around the world called with information after looking into a crystal ball or having a dream. A retired police officer in Minden, Nevada, reported a sighting of a young man that fit the description at a Nevada gas station. A woman said she had given Greene and his dog a ride to Colorado, but Greene did not have a dog. Glasses were found near the Inyo Crater's trailhead less than 10 miles from Greene's campsite, but the prescription did not match. The police talked with campers in the sites adjacent to Greene's. They interviewed the employees at the auto shop. No one had any concrete information.
What frustrates me the most with Matthew is he's so experienced, but he didn't tell anyone where he was going. There's nothing wrong with sending a text and saying, "Hey, I'm going to go climb in the minarets today." That would solve a lot of problems.
Detective Hornbeck said. Greene's sister began compiling facts and information, creating a Find Matthew Greene website and Facebook page. She did interviews with reporters. Friends started forums on climbing websites seeking information. Conversations were started, and theories were tossed around. Where would Matthew Greene have gone? The MLPD press release was published in the local papers. Media outlets in Pennsylvania picked up the story, and a short news brief made it in the Los Angeles Times. What makes the minarets so appealing to climbers is also what makes the rugged peaks so dangerous for climbing. The Ritter Range is located within the Sierra Nevada, just west of the crest. The jagged landscape of the minarets and sharp summits of Mount Ritter and Banner Peak can be seen from all over Mammoth Lakes. The range stands tall and mighty, separating the Sierra from the rounder mountains in the coastal range. Unlike the granite that makes up much of the Sierra, the Ritter Range is metavolcanic rock, which was formed in several volcanic supereruptions, according to Alan Glasner, professor of geology at the University of North Carolina and author of a book about the geology in and around Yosemite. These eruptions produced hot volcanic rock deposits that flow much like an avalanche. Metavolcanic rocks are generally kind of sketchy for climbing because they flake apart easily and are not nearly as strong as granite, Glasner says. That's why they form spiky landforms like the minarets instead of big smooth cliffs like Half Dome. It's been nearly 3 years since Matthew Greene vanished from Mammoth Lakes, and still no trace of him has surfaced. In August 2014, his campground neighbors returned to the area and saw a missing person sign. They called the police department and met with Detective Hornbeck and Bill Greene from Search and Rescue. They said they invited Matthew to go for a hike with them, but he declined. He did not say, or they could not remember, where he was going. Since Greene was carrying an ice axe and crampons, Mount Ritter is a logical guess for his destination on July 17, 2013. The Southeast Glacier is the most prominent snow route in the range. The trailhead is accessible from public transportation, and the mountain was in the chapter of the guidebook that he was carrying with him. For even the fittest of mountaineers, climbing Mount Ritter in one day is a big feat. The hike to Adiza Lake is 7 miles one way, and then it is another 4,000 vertical feet of off-trail hiking and climbing to reach the summit. At the time of Matt's disappearance, I had a pretty strong suspicion that he had gone to Ritter, but after reflecting on it and revisiting the area last summer, I am not so sure, said John Greco. I don't think the climb itself would be particularly appealing to Matt. It seems like somewhat of a slog with limited technical challenge. Greene did not have any known pre-existing medical conditions, and an animal attack is doubtful. There has never been a human death by mountain lion or black bear in the region, and grizzly bears haven't been there since the 1920s. It seems likely that Matthew Greene had a fatal climbing accident. Maybe he would have set out to climb the region's tallest and most prolific mountain on his last day in the area, but there is no hard evidence. If Matthew Greene hitchhiked, like he'd been known to do in the past, he could be anywhere. And since he had climbed in the minarets a few days prior to his disappearance, it is possible that the chapter of the guidebook was still in his pack. But there was enough suspicion that multiple search parties focused on the minarets and Ritter Range. Greene's close friends and climbing partners went to Mammoth Lakes to search in August 2013, and a number of local climbers and mountaineers have spearheaded their own small search parties. Dean Rosnaw, a former SAR member, has spent nearly 30 days searching for Greene. In August 2013, Rosnaw focused on the minarets, but late last summer and fall he began to gravitate toward Ritter and Banner. In a search area so vast, what we are looking for is so small, one will literally have to step on the evidence to find it, Rosnaw said. A lot of gear has been hauled out of the wilderness areas that surround Mammoth Lakes, but none if it was Matthew Greene's. A missing person is torturous for the living, the unknown and lack of resolution is part of a grieving process unlike any other. When the snow started to fall in October 2013, the search came to a halt and the missing person posters were taken down for the season. The family petitioned for and received a death certificate in Pennsylvania so they could settle his affairs. There has been no memorial service. The hardest part is the not knowing, said friend Tom Davidoff. If he'd let someone know where he was going, we'd have a completely different situation, but you can't get mad at him, we've all done it. Greene's closest friends and climbing partners each say they don't climb as much as they used to, and most of them can't really explain why. There is a lingering feeling of emptiness and sorrow that just dampens my enthusiasm for most things I do, said John Greco. I haven't done any mountain climbing since Matt disappeared, with the exception of the searches we did for him. I could attribute it to a lack of partners, work and family responsibilities getting in the way, but in truth, I just haven't been motivated to make it happen. In 2014, Greene's father, Robert, spent the summer in Mammoth Lakes. At 69 years old, he was slightly overweight and out of shape, but he began training so he was conditioned to hike in the High Sierra. He wanted to spend the summer in the mountains where his son is presumed dead, and he hiked nearly 700 miles that summer. He explored the trails that Matt had enjoyed, he searched with Rosnaw, and he climbed for the first time. Greco led Robert up Crystal Crag, so he could stand on a summit that Matt had also stood on the year prior. Greene's mother said,
I wanted him to get a taste of the kind of climbing Matt loved to do most, so he could hopefully understand the appeal and attraction. I just kept thinking of how Matt would have enjoyed watching his dad climb, something I'm sure he never would have considered doing before Matt's disappearance.
Greene's mother, Patricia, visited Mammoth Lakes that summer for the first and only time for 1 week with her daughter. Not a hiker, Patricia spent most of the time in town, while Minto hit the trails with her father.
I felt completely at peace and in awe of the beauty, but returning home just felt like I was turning my back on Matt, on the possibility of finding him. I wish I could move on, but it's just impossible.
To this day, no trace of Matthew Greene has ever been found.
Now the true story of the disappearance of Dwar Coons. Dwar was a 2-year-old boy who went missing on July 10, 2015, during a family camping trip in Lamhi County, Idaho. We will explore the camping trip in great detail, from the preparations to the events that led to Dwar's disappearance. Dwar's parents, Jessica Mitchell and Vernal Coons, along with his great-grandfather, Robert Walton, and a family friend, Isaac Rainwand, planned a camping trip to the Timber Creek campground near Leadore, Idaho. The group was excited about the trip and spent several days preparing for it. They packed camping gear, food, and clothing for the trip. They also brought Dwar's favorite toys, including his toy truck and stuffed animal. On the day of the trip, the group left for the campground in the morning. The drive to the campground was long and bumpy, but they finally arrived at their destination in the early afternoon. They set up their campsite, which included a tent and a campfire. Dwar's parents and great-grandfather set up the tent while Isaac Rainwand started the campfire. Once the campsite was set up, the group spent the rest of the day exploring the area around the campground. They went for a walk and collected rocks and sticks. Dwar's parents took him for a ride on his toy truck, and he enjoyed the fresh air and sunshine. As night fell, the group gathered around the campfire and roasted marshmallows. Dwar's parents put him to bed in the tent and read him a bedtime story. The rest of the group stayed up late, chatting and enjoying the peaceful surroundings. On the second day of the trip, the group decided to go fishing. They packed their fishing gear and set out for the nearby creek. Dwar's parents held his hand as they walked along the creek, and he played in the water. The group caught a few fish and returned to the campsite. After lunch, Dwar's parents put him down for a nap in the tent. Isaac Rainwan stayed at the campsite, while Jessica Mitchell and Vernal Coons went for a walk. When they returned to the campsite, they found that Dwar was missing. The group immediately started searching for Dwar. They searched the surrounding area, but he was nowhere to be found. They called out his name and asked nearby campers if they had seen him, but no one had. The group realized that they needed help and contacted the authorities. The authorities responded quickly, and a massive search operation was launched to find the boy. The search teams included law enforcement officers, search and rescue personnel, and volunteers. The search operation began in the area around the campsite and then expanded to cover a large area around the campground. The search teams used a variety of techniques and equipment, including search dogs, drones, and helicopters. The search for Dwar was challenging due to the rugged terrain and the dense forests surrounding the campground. The search teams had to navigate through steep terrain, thick vegetation, and rugged terrain to search for any signs of the boy. The weather also presented challenges to the search teams. The temperatures were high, and the air was dry, which made the search conditions difficult for search dogs. The teams also had to deal with the occasional thunderstorms that rolled through the area, causing search efforts to pause temporarily. The search teams faced challenges with communication as well. The rugged terrain and dense forest made it difficult to maintain communication between the teams. The search teams had to rely on radios and cell phones to stay in contact with each other, but the spotty reception and the rugged terrain made it difficult to maintain consistent communication. The search teams used a variety of techniques to look for Dwar. One of the primary methods was to use search dogs. The search dogs were trained to track human scent and were used to search for any signs of Dwar in the area around the campsite. The search teams also used drones equipped with cameras to search for Dwar from the air. The drones provided an aerial view of the terrain and helped the search teams to identify areas that were difficult to search on foot. The search teams also used ground-penetrating radar, GPR, to look for any signs of Dwar buried in the ground. GPR uses radar pulses to image the subsurface and is commonly used in archaeological and geological surveys. Using search dogs to look for Dwar was challenging due to the rugged terrain and the dry air. The scent of Dwar was difficult to detect, and the dogs had to work harder to pick up the scent. The search dogs were also affected by the heat and the dry air. They required frequent breaks and needed to be hydrated regularly. The search teams had to carry water and supplies for the dogs, which added to the logistical challenges of the search operation. Volunteers played a crucial role in the search for Dwar. The search operation was a massive undertaking, and the authorities could not have done it without the help of volunteers. The volunteers came from all over the country and included local residents, church groups, and search and rescue organizations. The volunteers assisted with the search efforts, helped to distribute supplies, and provided emotional support to the search teams. They worked tirelessly in the scorching heat and rugged terrain, often for days on end. Managing volunteers during the search for Dwar was challenging. The authorities had to ensure that the volunteers were safe and that their efforts were coordinated with the search teams. They had to provide volunteers with food, water, and supplies while ensuring that the volunteers did not interfere with the search efforts of the trained personnel. The authorities had to maintain effective communication with the volunteers, ensure that they were properly trained, and assign them to areas that needed the most attention. They also had to manage the influx of volunteers and ensure that they were properly registered and accounted for. The local community played an essential role in the search for Dwar. They provided support to the search teams and the family of Dwar. The community rallied around the family and offered their prayers, emotional support, and resources to help find the boy. The community also played a vital role in spreading awareness of Dwar's disappearance. They shared information on social media, put up posters, and organized search parties. The community's efforts helped to keep the search for Dwar in the public eye and generated leads and tips that were helpful in the search operation. While community involvement was critical in the search for Dwar, it also presented challenges. The authorities had to manage the influx of people who wanted to help, ensure their safety, and coordinate their efforts with the search teams. The authorities also had to deal with false leads and rumors that circulated on social media, which hampered the search efforts. The authorities had to sift through the misinformation and follow up on leads that were credible, which took time and resources away from the search operation. After weeks of searching, the authorities were unable to find Dwar. The search operation was eventually called off, and the case was classified as a missing persons case. The search operation was one of the most extensive and expensive in the history of Idaho, involving hundreds of trained personnel and volunteers. Despite extensive searches and investigations, the young boy has never been found. One of the most puzzling aspects of the case is the presence of several suspects who have been linked to Dwar's disappearance. Jessica Mitchell and Vernal Coons are Dwar's mother and father. They were camping with Dwar on the day he disappeared. Jessica and Vernal have been considered suspects in Dwar's disappearance since the early stages of the investigation. Investigators have questioned their stories, and both parents have given conflicting accounts of what happened on the day Dwar vanished. For example, Vernal initially claimed that he had taken Dwar to a nearby store, while Jessica stated that she had been with Dwar at the campsite. Furthermore, investigators have noted that the couple was reportedly arguing on the day Dwar went missing, which has raised suspicions. In addition to their conflicting stories, investigators have pointed out that the couple has a history of drug use, and they were reportedly under the influence of drugs on the day Dwar disappeared. Investigators have also noted that Vernal has a history of domestic violence. The couple has consistently denied any involvement in Dwar's disappearance. They have stated that they believe someone else took their son. The couple has undergone several lie detector tests, but the results have been inconclusive. Isaac Rainwand is an ex-convict who was camping in the same area as Dwar on the day he disappeared. Rainwand, in addition to the 3 suspects mentioned above, there have been several other persons of interest in the case of Dwar Coons. These include Dwar's great-grandfather, Robert Walton, who was reportedly camping in the area at the time of Dwar's disappearance, and a man named Eric J. Kennedy, who was also camping in the area. Investigators have suggested that Walton may have had a motive to harm Dwar. According to reports, Walton was reportedly upset with Vernal and Jessica because they had taken Dwar away from him. Investigators have also pointed out that Walton has a history of violence and has been involved in several domestic incidents. Eric J. Kennedy was also camping in the area at the time of Dwar's disappearance. Investigators have suggested that Kennedy may have been involved in Dwar's disappearance, but he has not been charged with any crime. Kennedy has stated that he was not involved in Dwar's disappearance and has cooperated with investigators. However, he has a criminal history, including charges for drugs and assault. The investigation into Dwar's disappearance has been ongoing for several years. The case has been complicated by the conflicting stories and evidence provided by the suspects, as well as the remote location where Dwar disappeared. Investigators have conducted several searches in the area, including using cadaver dogs and a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging technology. However, no trace of Dwar has been found. In addition to the physical searches, investigators have also conducted extensive interviews with the suspects and witnesses. They have also analyzed cell phone records and other digital data. Despite the efforts of investigators, the case remains unsolved. The suspects in the case have all denied involvement, and there is no conclusive evidence to indicate who may have taken Dwar or what may have happened to him. The disappearance of Dwar Coons has been shrouded in mystery and speculation as investigators and the public have tried to piece together what happened to the young boy. While some theories have been put forth, there is still no definitive answer as to what happened to Dwar on that fateful day in 2015. One theory that has been put forth is that Dwar may have been taken by a wild animal. The area where he disappeared is known to be home to several predators, including wolves, mountain lions, and bears. However, experts have stated that it is unlikely that a wild animal would have taken Dwar without leaving behind some trace of the boy, such as clothing or blood. Another theory is that Dwar may have wandered away from the campsite on his own. However, the terrain in the area is rugged and difficult, and it seems unlikely that a toddler would have been able to navigate it without help. The disappearance of Dwar Coons has had a profound impact on the family and the community, and the aftermath of his disappearance has been marked by grief, suspicion, and speculation. In the immediate aftermath of Dwar's disappearance, search and rescue teams scoured the surrounding area in an effort to find the young boy. However, as time passed, hope began to fade, and it became increasingly clear that the chances of finding Dwar alive were slim. The family and the community rallied around Dwar's parents, Vernal Coons Jr. and Jessica Mitchell, offering support and prayers in the hope that Dwar would be found. However, as the investigation into his disappearance continued, suspicion began to mount, and the family found themselves at the center of the investigation. Both Coons and Mitchell were named as suspects in the case, and investigators suggested that they may have had a motive to harm their son. However, both Coons and Mitchell denied any involvement in their son's disappearance, and the case remained unsolved. The community was also rocked by the disappearance of Dwar, with many expressing shock and disbelief that something like this could happen in their small town. The disappearance of a young child was a tragedy that touched the hearts of many, and people came together to support the family and to try to make sense of what had happened. As time passed, the investigation into Dwar's disappearance continued, and new information emerged that only deepened the mystery surrounding his disappearance. One of the key pieces of evidence that emerged was a cadaver dog's alert to a scent in the area surrounding the campsite where Dwar disappeared. This discovery led to a renewed search of the area, but no remains or other evidence were found. The dog's alert raised questions about what had happened to Dwar and whether foul play was involved. The investigation also uncovered information about the criminal histories of several individuals who were camping in the area at the time of Dwar's disappearance. Both Rainwand and Kennedy were named as suspects in the case, and investigators suggested that they may have had a motive to harm Dwar. However, despite the suspicions surrounding the family and the other individuals camping in the area, no one has been charged in connection with Dwar's disappearance. The case remains unsolved, and the mystery of what happened to Dwar continues to haunt the family and the community.